Welcome back. Top Democrats are making it clear to the Trump administration, get ready for an onslaught of subpoenas come January. One senior Democratic source told Axios that the new majority is preparing a, quote, subpoena cannon with potentially more than 85 targets. Democrats want to investigate pretty much everything Republicans would not over the last 2 years. Think President Trump's family business dealings, tax returns, handling of the Russia probe, and so much more. The president is already labeling Democrats' oversight plans as presidential harassment, claiming today that it is causing the stock market big headaches. One of the key committees will be the House Oversight Committee. Democrats on the committee have tried to push Republicans to issue more than 60 subpoenas to the Trump administration and were denied. But soon, the Democrats are going to be the ones in charge, and they'll be able to issue their own. I'm joined now by Virginia Democratic Congressman Gerry Connolly, a member of the House Oversight Committee. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us.
Good to be with you, Katie.
So where do you want to start? What investigation will be first?
Well, first of all, let me lay to rest. I mean, Democrats have never, when they've been in the majority, gone subpoena crazy. We have used the subpoena in a judicious manner as a tool, a part of an investigatory tool, and as part of our hearing process. So the idea that somehow we're going to go subpoena crazy is just false. However, the subpoena is there to compel testimony when we believe somebody is not willing otherwise to cooperate. To answer your question, I think we start, personally, with the census. It's timely. We don't have a lot of time left. We know we have conflicting testimony in which Wilbur Ross misled the Congress, the Commerce Secretary, in his answer to why did that question on citizenship get added to the census after 60 years of being absent. And he said the Department of Justice really pressed him. We now know from emails that's not true. He was the one pressing for this question. So I think we're going to have to subpoena him to compel his testimony before Congress and to explain the contradiction in his explanations before other committees of Congress. But this is a very consequential question because it's going to lead to high rates of noncompliance and possibly an inaccurate census. And so much flows from the census every 10 years.
Are you talking about, like, I don't know, gerrymandering, redistricting?
Reapportionment, that's right. States' representation hinges on getting that number right. States could gain or lose seats through inaccurate information. Federal dollars flow based on census tract data. And so red and blue states have a stake in an accurate census. And this citizenship question is designed to, frankly, hurt compliance and scare many immigrant families who otherwise would be happy to comply with the census.
Well, I wonder how you're going to prioritize it after that. And I have to be honest with you, when I asked you what you were going to start with, census was not high on my list. I was thinking something more along the lines of the travel ban or the migrant family separations or Donald Trump's tax returns or the oversight into his business. After all, there's been so many questions on whether his family's been not pocketing money, but being or benefiting from the Donald Trump administration. Look at the Trump D.C. hotel. So how do you end up prioritizing those investigations? If you're going to start with census, where do you go next? And who's the one that's going to lay out the plans, the roadmap for what the Democrats want to do?
Yeah, and Katie, I want to be clear. I'm answering for myself.
Yeah.
Committee has not determined priorities. No, you're absolutely right. We're going to have to winnow down that list of the 64 outstanding subpoena requests we have just in our committee. And we're not going to do all 64, and we're not going to treat all 64 as of the same order of importance. So we're going to have to look at impact and importance to the country.
Yeah.
And the elevation of the issue itself, but also, like census, how timely is it? We're running out of time on the census, which is why I'd move it up on my priority list and would advocate for that with my colleagues. But I believe we're quite capable of doing that. We'll coordinate with other committees, and we'll undertake serious, impactful investigations and use the subpoena only when we have to. as a tool of last resort.
So Lawrence Tribe has weighed in on the power of the subpoena, and he's not so confident that Democrats are going to get as much information as they want out of this. He says, hate to say it, but counting on a Democratic House subpoenas to unlock all the secrets of this corrupt administration could prove naive. A Trumpified judiciary expanded further with the Senate's acquiescence might let the Trumpsters stonewall, so democracy remains endangered. What do you think of this?
Well, I think that's one of the reasons why the subpoena should not be so debased by being commonplace that it's not the extraordinary tool it is. When the Republicans were in the majority, I think they did just that. And as a result, they diluted the value of the subpoena, which when Democrats came back in power, we did not do. Dan Burton, when he was chairman of our committee, issued 1,000 subpoenas in the Clinton administration. Darrell Issa, when he was chairman during the Obama years, issued somewhere between 100 and 200 unilateral subpoenas. We don't want to replicate that. We want to use the tool when we have to, but we want to make sure that it is an extraordinary event when we do,
so you're not
and it will be complied with.
You're not going to follow the Republicans' precedent that they created in 2015 to be able to allow committee chairmen to unilaterally subpoena somebody without consulting the committee.
I think, no, I think I want unilateral chairman power to issue subpoenas. Now that we're back in power and we're up against Donald J. Trump, and his corrupt administration, his pathological lying, we've got to have this tool at our hand that we can use when we have to, and we're never going to get Republican compliance. We've already seen the complete abrogation of responsibility for oversight and accountability in the 2 years the Republicans have been in charge of the Congress during the Trump administration. So we can't somehow then yield power back to them, having worked so hard to win the majority Tuesday night.
Congressman Jerry Connolly. Congressman, thank you very much for joining us.
My great pleasure.
Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Meet the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.